team qualified for the World Cup finals in 2001, qualifying for the 2002 World Cup finals in Korea and Japan. Chris Armas and Claudio Reyna have taken the time to join us. And boys, you haven't aged a day, he lied.
Thanks, Jack.
So, you know, let's set the context of this. It was deep into the qualifying round, and the game took place on Saturday, October 6th, 2001. That was about 3 weeks after two planes crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center, and another plane crashed into the Pentagon, and another plane crashed in a field in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. I was still shaken preparing for that telecast, as it was a mass meeting of people. The lines outside old Foxborough Stadium, which since has been turned into a pile of rubble, were enormous. Take me back to 9/11 in each of your experiences. Chris, where were you, and what is your memory of that day that shook us all?
I was in Chicago. That's where I was playing at the time with the Chicago Fire, and on the way to training that morning. You know, a normal day of work, got there, and then the TVs were on, and slowly that information came, and it just seemed at first very, you know, like a big accident, you know, a plane hit one of the towers. But then quickly it seemed deliberate, and we all knew what was going on. And yeah, it was calling back home. We couldn't get in touch with anybody. You know, my father-in-law worked down on Wall Street. All the phone lines were busy, couldn't get in touch with anyone. You know, my wife was with me in Chicago at the time. So it was in shambles, like just very unnerving, obviously, and something we never experienced before. So it was tough.
Claudio, were you in Europe at the time?
Yeah, I was in Glasgow. My time when I was at Glasgow Rangers, and it was, yeah, I remember like, you know, that moment like it was yesterday, and I was training with the team. We had our second training. It was the afternoon on a Tuesday, and in the afternoons, typically we just did some running, some sort of longer running in intervals, and we were like on the second field away from the actual facility in the locker room area, and our equipment manager, Jimmy Bell, ran out sprinting, and about, you know, the last sort of like 20-30 meters, I realized he was trying to get in touch with me, and my group was running back, and we were waiting to run to the other side of the field, and he was trying to get my attention. We had a really tough, disciplined head coach who he didn't want to get caught, even despite the magnitude of the events, like interrupting the training and to tell me what had happened. And even then he couldn't really get the words out. But he told me that planes had flown into skyscrapers in New York. And so didn't really know, like Chris said, thought it was just sort of an accident at first. And then by the time we got in, everybody turned the TVs on, and by then it was already known that it was very likely a terrorist attack. So it was really unnerving. We played that weekend. I couldn't play, to be honest with where I was. I couldn't. I felt being away at the time was even being further away than it feels today, because of technology is different. So, you know, I couldn't get. I couldn't wait to get back home. And then we had those, you know, in about a few weeks, the game to play, and obviously in you know, going to the airport, I was really nervous. I flew back with my wife and son, and we were, you know, scared, thinking about, you know, what had just happened. So it was, though, I think, you know, good to get back for me back to the U.S. and to see, you know, my teammates and American people that had gone through amazing suffering. It was bad in the UK as well, because I think there was, after American citizens, the UK, you know, Scottish and English and Welsh had passed away as well. So it was obviously a massive event, and one we would certainly never forget.
Chris, were the fire training still in Lake Forest, north of Chicago, on 9/11?
Yes, that's exactly where they were.
So you had a pretty good view of downtown and the Sears Tower and the 100-story buildings that were in Chicago. Was it in your mind, driving back to your home in Chicago? Keep your eye on the sky.
We it was interesting that day. It was, a couple of players that lived further up north, and my wife ended up coming that day, and she hung out there with them, and it was just random. It was random that she was up. She wasn't at the apartment. We lived a few blocks away from the Sears Tower, and then after training, it was, do we go back to the city, because it was talked about there was a plane coming this way, and you started hearing all these things. So we actually hung out around there for a little while, and then eventually went home later that day. But all of a sudden, you started questioning everything. We're sure what would be the next move.
So both of you bring me into the training period leading up to the Jamaica game in Foxborough. What did Bruce first tell the team when it was gathered in person?
Well, I don't remember exactly. It was a while ago, but I do remember that it was a very intense week. And there was certainly, I think, players that were, had many different emotions from sort of, I think, fear to anger and everything in between because of what had just happened to our country. And, we were very focused, trying to block out what was going on. What was still, occupying and, getting full coverage was the 9/11 attacks at that point. And, it certainly got our mind off of it like sports always does. And I think it was nice to be able to at least think of playing, unlike, the moment we're in today. So we were able to focus on the game. We had a quick kind of turnaround in preparation, as you always do with these games in the middle of seasons. And I just remember, a big focus on what was happening with the game, but it wasn't the only thing that occupied our minds because there was all this news that was trickling in and, what was going to be as a country, our next move and what was going to happen. So, I think we were all a little bit nervous because we represented the United States in terms of from a security aspect. I think we were concerned, but we felt good. But, I just think more than anything, it was really, intense. We wanted to do the job and, hopefully make some people feel good about the country and just kind of get their minds off of it because at the end it was just sport, after what we'd just gone through as a country.
Yeah, the what I remember is just getting on an airplane for the first time since that. It just seemed way too soon, and there was those nerves. But I don't remember the first meeting. I don't remember that, but I do remember what Claudio said. It was an intense week, but it was always so good coming back with the group because we had guys that were coming from Europe, and it was a really good group when you really now can look back, and it's no surprise the team did so well at that World Cup. But the talk that week and the intensity and the pressure, like for sure 9/11's on our minds, but we were coming off some tough games, some losses, and we knew we had to get a result. And it was big focus that week, and that's what I remember. Competitive as always, but big pressure going into that next game.
So both of you were central players. Chris, a defensive midfielder, and Claudio, the man who was responsible for setting up the attack and transitioning from defense to attack. How did Bruce, can you remember how he specifically prepared for the Jamaica side? Because We used to joke in the media that you could have woken Bruce Arena up after sleeping half the night at 3 a.m. and instantly said to him, "How do you beat Argentina?" And he could give you an X and O description of how he would bring guys into his lineup and take on Argentina. And he never failed to amaze me at how he used the parts to make a greater whole than all the parts added up to.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was really good on getting a feel for the players that were ready, that were in good form, and that he can count on. If you look at the team that day, maybe a little bit unusual to the way soccer is today, but there was older players. I think players between 28 and 32, and I think it was very much about winning. That's it. That was the focus all week with Bruce and the group. We knew what we had to do. It wasn't about how we're going to break them down and play pretty and keep possession. Back then, dating ourselves a little bit, but the fields weren't always the best. We were playing on an NFL stadium. We didn't know what to expect in terms of the surface at times when we rolled into town to play. And Foxborough was an amazing advantage, home field advantage. We felt it was a good place for us to go play that game. But it was really competitive. Even if you look at the lineup, it was just trying to put guys in that I think Bruce could count on, and being aggressive, being dangerous from the beginning. We always, seemed to start well and good and, under Bruce, and aggressive. And that was the same during this game. But I to be honest, it wasn't too much about the opponent. It was much more about us and what we needed to do. And, again, I never recall, like sometimes today in the press, there's always this conversation of, how we're going to play, the style of play. There was none of that, none of those conversations going on. It was, we knew what we needed to do. We had a locker room full of guys that knew what was ahead of us, not just for one game, but for 2 games. And we were really focused. And, we all felt, while it was nervous, going back now, I'm thinking about what had just happened to our country, and we didn't want to let anybody down. We wanted to, represent the U.S. in a good way. And I think that was a little bit of the pressure, that if we would have not qualified or not won at home, that it certainly would have been, a difficult task to get to the World Cup. So we were 100% focused. Everybody who played and who didn't get the chance to start was all in together. And I think that's what Bruce created that week. And, we had a very strong team, and we felt, we were going to win the game, but it wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, that's for sure.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think Claudio said it, like that team that was out there understood what CONCACAF was about, what those games were about, what it means in those tough games, real games. And I think Bruce understood that more than anyone. He understood, the magnitude of the game and maybe of the time, but he understood the opposition as well, for sure. Like, it's both teams need the result. We need the result for sure. We're at home. The slow grass over there, Jamaica, combative. It was going to be about, digging deep. And so, he did talk a lot about, like, the concentration, the focus. And like he sends us out always, it was, Claude, you remember, like, let's get the first shot, the first foul. He would, and listen, he motivated that group, which we didn't need much. Claude's right. Like, we had a nation for sure that was behind us, and we had an opportunity, like, for sure. We all felt it. Like, let's give all of us had that chance of 90 minutes of normalcy, take everyone's minds off of it. And then, like, that team went for it. I mean, that team, that group of players, that whole roster, we went after it. That was a bunch of competitors and a lot of winners in that group that understood.
Claudio, we didn't have the kind of advanced analytics that media has so much of today. And Claudio, I'll bet that you were the most fouled American player in history per minute played, because your ability to hold the ball was evident to opponents. I I have followed a path that has taken me in and out of hockey, which is much more emotionally explosive and perhaps better suited to my personality. But how did you manage the emotions that had built up over the 3 weeks since 9/11, and isolate your concentration and not retaliate when the Jamaicans would foul you and you were coming off of an injury?
Yeah, I mean, I got used to it. It was interesting because, my role with my club team was different than the national team. So I had to kind of go back and forth. And it happens to players where you go to your club team and you maybe play in a different system and in a different position as well. But I had the responsibility with the national team to try to, get the ball, give us rhythm, allow us to play and get the other players, our other weapons in the game. So I always going into every game, would sort of scan in the beginning, the first few minutes, what the opponent was going to do to us and to me, because typically the first 10 minutes, the game plan and the strategy is there for everybody to see. There's no secrets, and so I could tell right away whether there was somebody who was going to mark me closely or they would stay in the zone. And then I would always just trying to find a way to, to sometimes get away, take my player away to allow other players to get the ball. And, and then sometimes when it was difficult to get us going as well. But we had a lot of good players on the team who could punish the opponent. So I didn't feel too, worried about if I sometimes did get involved in certain areas, certain times of the game in certain periods. And it's something I learned with experience. I felt when I was younger, I always had to, force myself into doing something, and then I wouldn't, likely play the best game. Where over 90 minutes at that point, I think, was able to get the ball enough, create some moments, but also let other players create danger with our speed. Whether it was Kobe, we had Ernie, in midfield between John and Chris, they were also very capable and, moving the ball. So I just try to always, help the team, whether it was on the ball or even off the ball as well. And, I got kicked here and there a few times. I remember in that game, Jamaica was very physical. So, they always wanted to beat us. Similar to today, we're the big game for a lot of the countries in CONCACAF, and they still had a chance too. So it was wide open at the time, and, it was all to play for with 2 games left. So, it was massive game for us, no doubt about it. We wanted to do it there. We wanted to win, and it was a difficult game for sure. Though it wasn't easy. Jamaica had a lot of good players and who were playing in MLS and in the Premier League, and they had individuals that could punish you. So as Chris said, we had to be alert so much, and I also had to do my defensive work as well to help the team. But yeah, it was a good responsibility to have want the ball and get the team going. And I do remember that game, it wasn't that easy because the result was so important. So we scored, and when they sat back, then they scored, and then we kind of moved forward again. And again, we played a really smart game, and we were very solid defensively. And looking at the lineup in the group, we had, again, I keep going back to experience, and it's something that it's so valuable in a game like this. And we had it all over the field. With the exception of Landon, everybody was more of an experienced type player that'd been in a lot of situations like this before.
Yeah, there was a 5-year gap between Landon, who was 19 years old at the time, and the next youngest player. So, Chris, take me ahead to the Joe Max Moore penalty kick, which propelled the U.S. in a really historic moment into the 2002 World Cup Finals. I was reading a post-game report in review. Did Bruce actually turn to the players and say who should take it after Donovan was fouled in the box?
I don't remember that. He would normally have some guys designated, a few guys, but I don't remember that at that moment that I think Joe picked up the ball and stepped up.
Yeah.
But
How unlike him, right?
yeah, you know what? Like, it's interesting. You talk about Claudio before getting fouled, and even now as I'm coaching, we talk to the guys a lot about some of the players go to I call it the fearless spaces. They kind of go where it's easy. Claude always would go where it was difficult to find the ball, where it mattered. And therefore, it's tight spaces. And for me as the holding midfielder, I could always find him, and he was never hiding. So that was always that was the leader of our team. So that's how we had to be. And then you get guys like Ernie and Kobe. These guys, like, we all had nerves, but man, we wouldn't back down. That team wouldn't give in. So then you talk about the penalty, and when you talk about that team and guys that really, embodied that, I think Joe Max, we all would know that this guy, he's a winner. Not just a competitor, but he thrived in that moment. He scored one earlier, probably had some confidence for sure. It always helps. But, I remember him stepping up, grabbing the ball, and just absolutely calmly tucking it away, which really coolly taken. But it was obviously a massive goal.
We've only got a couple of minutes left before we see the re-air at 8 Eastern time on YouTube and Facebook. But if you could, both of you, sum up your feelings about that 2002 team. I know, Chris, you had terrible luck with an injury that kept you out of the World Cup, but you were a major part of building that team. And Claudio, obviously, you were central to its success. The U.S. has not gone as far as that 2002 team did. What propelled it to its level of greatness?
I think we had first of all, a lot of good players. It's important to say it starts with quality, and we had good players. We had depth. We had a good balance of experience and younger players coming through, and we had competitors on the team. We keep talking about it. It was a tightly knit group. We had a really bad experience in France '98, and I think after that, when Bruce came in, it was really about getting it right, getting the national team right, earning the respect again, and we had no fear as we got closer to that World Cup, and there was I remember the amount of players that can make the squad, make the team was so many guys and a lot of talented players, and we just believed that we can compete with anybody. And I think when you look at that group, going back to it, it was just a group of really good players, a lot of guys that had to play different positions and different systems, and they just did it. There was no egos. We had guys, you mentioned Joe Max before. He was incredible in qualifying, leading up, and in that game he summarized the type of players that for sure Bruce was going to start that day. I mean, I'm sure when he arrived in camp as coach and coaching staff, he started picking players that I need to count on, and Joe Max was one of those. And then he kind of fast forward to 2002, and he was someone who didn't play as much, and I think of the guys who didn't get the chance to play as much, but they were so supportive. They supported the team, and that doesn't happen all the time. So it was really amazing to see that camaraderie, that togetherness, because again, without that, even though you have quality, you're not going to achieve anything. And I think we had everything coming together perfectly.
Chris, you got about 20 seconds.
Listen, when you talk about the very best teams that can make runs in World Cups, it's good players, the guys that you can count on, guys that don't care who gets the credit, guys that work hard, and we had a lot of guys that were reliable, and that's not common. That every which way you look, you can count on the guy around you. So, an incredible group. I felt really part of that team, and I was proud to be part of it.
You're both close to my heart, and two of my all-time heroes, Chris Armas, Claudio Reyna. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
See you.